All right, we are officially live. This is a fun experimentation. I'm super happy to join this group here today. Welcome everybody. This is the Disco Posse podcast, the first live video podcast version of the show. We're going to have a lot of fun today. I wanted to kind of open up a neat topic area, and I figured I needed a few extra voices on this one. So I'm extremely excited to welcome some great folks on the show today. So, of course, my name is Eric Wright. I'm Disco Posse on Twitter. You can find where I write at discoposse.com. If you can find all the show notes and everything at discopossepodcast.com. Boy, that's a lot of discos and a lot of P's. And with that, we're going to open the floor. We've got two amazing folks who are joining us today, great community advocates, people who've got a really cool history in technology. Today, we're going to call this the Retro Show. This is a chance for us to go back. Everybody's got this in their memory banks, right? We remember doing things in data centers, and we've got these crazy old stories, and we love to nerd out on it. So we're just going to have fun today, and we're going to share some classic stories. And hopefully this will be important. You'll remember these days. Angelo, we have Angelo Luciani joining us today. You may know him as a co-creator of Virtual Design Master and many other great things that he does along with me and on his own. Angelo, introduce yourself to the folks and tell us where we can find you online.
Thanks, Eric. Angelo Luciani. You can find me on Twitter at Angelo Luciani. I blog at virtuwise.com. Great to see you, Eric. Great to see Tim here. Going to have a fun talk. And I've already those memories are already creating emotions in me that kind of scared me from the past. So good to be on.
It's bittersweet to celebrate the history, but and I'll tell you about why it's important in a minute. But before we get further, Tim Smith is again a good friend, somebody who I have a monstrous respect in what he does in the industry, for the community, for folks. Tim, if you want to introduce yourself, tell us where we can find you online, and then we're going to get rolling.
Sure. Yeah. Tim Smith. You can find me on Twitters at tsmith_co. And then I also blog at tsmith.co. Not very original.
Well, and so quickly tell us I think I remember hearing the story, but there's no .com. Tell us how did the .co end up coming together?
So just because it was the cheapest, honestly, the tsmith.com was taken. Apparently, Timothy Smith, the same as me, I'm apparently the mayor of Fort Lauderdale. So nice. Until he gives up that domain, I'm stuck with no M.
It sounds as though you made the right decision. So this is the reason why I wanted to bring up this topic today. We've got people who are like, one of the most recent memes that's floating around was like this sort of matrix of different cell phones of different ages. And it's hilarious to watch these things if you talk about, hey, what's going on with Kubernetes in the world and how is serverless going to take over? You get 3 or 4, tweets. People are like, I agree or I disagree. It doesn't really create this kind of violent love for a conversation. So the only thing that's not political that gets a lot of reactions is when we go into the past and we say like, oh, remember when, and this is a whole thing. So I think about everybody in technology, the three of us here and all the folks that are listening, watching live, and who will listen after the fact. We all generally have a history in the industry. And I believe firmly that your today is built on a period of yesterdays pooling together to create an experience. And really what it is that I wouldn't be doing cloud, Kubernetes, I wouldn't have done OpenStack. I wouldn't have done all these things if it had not been for having lived through working with people that did VAX, VMS, and who came up and, I was a Novell administrator. So we have all these things so today I believe it makes me a better architect because I've kind of had these lived experiences in these crazy environments. And, I know that both of you guys came out of different sides of the industry. Tim, let's start with you. How did you come to be where you're at right now? You're at Veeam, which is really super cool. But talk about what you're doing and kind of how you got there.
Yeah. So I'm a solutions architect at Veeam right now, which is pretty cool. I cover some of their emerging technologies, and it's funny. I was in their community-based program, the Vanguards, for a couple years. because previous life was a VAR, and I actually had always worked at different VARs ever since college. Although I started out doing telephone systems instead of computers, but the telephone guy was leaving, and I had an interest in computers, and so it just kind of naturally evolved. And from working on onesie twosies PCs at a 2-computer shop to I just kept going to a VAR that did bigger and bigger customers until one day I found I was working in larger data centers.
And if you think about, those experiences, right, God, you've probably had your nose buried deep in an IVR system a few times trying to figure out the craziness that goes on. Telco is like a crazy world too, because we have,
it really is.
And it's as old as it is new. Like, no matter how amazingly new all the technology is, it's some crazy old technology that's powering it, right?
Yeah, you're still going to find like DOS 6.2 boxes out there running IVRs. And I mean, how long removed are we from DOS 6.2? Like,
exactly.
Well, I want to say at least 10 years, but it's probably 20.
Definitely in the 20 range. That's the sad part. And it just, like, that was the last version. There is no 6.3. It just stopped. They stopped making it. And it's basically at this sort of lock-in, not a lot of DOS hacking going on. But, that's it, right? Today, we're doing, my company, we're running along with Microsoft a campaign around announcing the end of life and end of support for SQL 2008. And you think to yourself, having lived through deploying a bunch of it, I think, oh boy, yeah, I guess it's about time. Wait a second. That's a long time ago. It's 11 years. How is an 11-year-old year-dated system, which was actually even the year before, it was actually usually went out the year before the actual number. How are we still running this stuff? But that's how we got here, right? Systems are sticky. We call it legacy for a reason. It's got a long tail. It's going to have a long life. Angela, you came along with me through the financial sector. So
Right.
oh boy, some old school stories, right?
Yeah. And before I jump into that, just to reinforce the point you made, just think of airports. I think they're still using dot matrix printers. I
Yep.
mean, and it doesn't, that always puzzles me. And maybe that's just me nerding out on it, but it always puzzles me. Like, what is it that's holding them back, that forcing them or causing them to continue to use dot matrix printers? It always puzzles me to hear that. And I just think back of the toner cartridges and things like that, and how, that whole ecosystem is still in place to support those dot matrix printers. Just real interesting.
And we all know that read.
Yeah. And usually, it's sort of before.
Yeah,
and that's exactly it. And you know it so well because before you board the plane, you're sitting in the area there, and you can hear that, right? And it's like second nature to you. So
this one for Tim too. You'll know this one. Meridian Mail, mailbox number.
Oh yes.
We
all the time
know that because we had those phones for a decade at least, and they're still out there.
And those are going to be the things, like, I'm going to be 90 years old on my deathbed, and I'm going to it's going to be ingrained in my head, that along with dial-up modem sounds. I think we'll never forget, even if we never hear it again for the rest of our lives, we're never going to forget what that sounded like to get on the internet.
Yeah. Or I remember the old days of you'd put the BlackBerry too close to the Polycom and just like you'd get that weird like buzzing sound because of probably what was cancer causing radiation pouring out of the microphone.
Yeah. But I got two stories to share. I'll just share the first one, and this one goes back to Novell 411 days. File and print servers, the good old days,
where it all just worked.
And
yes, it was new. It was the first directory, actual directory system other than the classic 3X stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think some of the first certifications people would go for, those Novell certifications were very popular back in the day. But so we had a Novell 411 server in another part of the country. I had a few members on my team visiting that office to do a desktop refresh, I think it was at the time, and we got an alert that one of our servers had a bad disk. Okay, fine. You put in the call to your support. And back then we were running compact 1500s towers,
Nice.
those floor models. and again, that was running file and print for that particular office. And what happened was, so we had a disk failure. Fine, we had RAID, so it was still going. They shipped out a new disk, and one of the desktop guys there sort of became our hands since it's a remote site. So we said, hey, do you mind pulling out the drive and putting in this new one? It'll start to rebuild, and away you go. So he puts in the new drive, and then while that's rebuilding, there was a second drive that started flashing with an alert, and it was about to go down. So somewhere, somehow, wires got crossed or something. That drive got pulled out before that new drive was finished rebuilding.
Oof.
Needless to say, and there were so many eyes on it. You think something like this would have been caught, but a colleague put in the second drive while the first one wasn't finished rebuilding, and needless to say, the file server went belly up. So then it's domino effect, right? That entire office is down, can't do any business. Then we all go into what just happened? What happened? And then after about 20 minutes of discussion, we realized that, hey, we didn't properly communicate with each other, and the server had two drives pulled out and put in, and et cetera, et cetera. So what happened there? This whole after effect is us in the main office had to redirect all those users to the main server over the WAN. Folks were still getting their files. It was very laborious to kind of reconnect everyone to that server at the main office, because we weren't designed at the time for that kind of work. And then we had that server shipped to our main office, and for 3 days, 3 solid days, I remember not even sleeping. For 3 days, we were at the office rebuilding that server. We're storing it from backup, and at the time, we were backing up to a mainframe, which then went off to tape. So that took quite a while to get that rebuilt. We ultimately got it rebuilt, sent back, and maybe 5 days from the time it happened, folks were back to normal. But boy, did we learn a lot around that situation. And one book that stands out to me, and I heard about this and read it later on, a few years later on, was the Checklist Manifesto. And I really believe in what the book talks about, where you should really have a checklist and go through a checklist of items when doing changes or implementations, etc., and really not move beyond the next checkpoint until it's done. So that was a pretty crazy experience where I didn't get to sleep for, I think it was like 3 days. So
it's
fun
really
times.
easy to forget how spoiled we are with virtual machines, and not even considering containers or anything like that. But yeah, just it's easy to forget how bad things went when physical servers died.
You were hunting for CDs. It was like, oh, I needed to have, it was a compact, so you had to use the ROM packs, and it had to be the right version for your, oh man, it was crazy, right?
Yeah, and those compact servers were rock solid, I tell you.
Oh,
rock solid.
Especially if you got the 3 power supplies in the back too. It'd run on 2, but not 1. And
yeah, rock solid. But yeah, you folks are right. Just finding the CDs, the 411 CDs back then. Boy, the whole exercise was a challenge, but it was a good challenge.
Well, you remember getting the TechNet packets?
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
It was like Christmas.
Yeah.
all these new CDs. Like finally, you get the documentation. You've got the new OS. Yeah, it was like Christmas every time those came into the office.
Oh, and I think we all remember there's always one person in the group that these guys like, oh, we've got this sleeve of CDs, and then eventually they became DVDs. But like that was the CD pack would come, and you'd have 12 of them because you'd get one every month, and you'd hang on to them. And someone would say, well, like I'm going to install this. So like you can't just install it just because you've got the CD. And here's my favorite quote. It's always, well, don't we have some kind of like blanket license agreement?
Oh.
Like, so there's no such thing as a blanket license agreement. And if there is, you wouldn't even want to imagine how much it would cost.
Yeah. So I got kind of a retro story, but it's not related to data center, but it is related to computers. This was my very first experience. So in early high school is when I got my first computer, which was a hand-me-down Radio Shack Tandy TRS-80.
Nice.
2. Trash 82, dual 5 1/4 inch floppies, right? And this came from relatives' business after they were done with it. But so it had basic. So I, put in the floppy for basic, and within a couple hours, I figured out how to just simply take in some variables and then spit them back out. And so I, was asking for your name and stuff like that, and I was just thrilled, sitting on the floor in the carpet in my basement. And so I make this up, and I call my mom downstairs. I'm like, Mom, you got to come take a look at this. So she gets down there, and it's on the floor. So she gets down on all fours. She's looking at the screen. And I learned my first lesson in programming because on the screen was flashing, what is your name? With a flashing cursor. I should have put in type in your name because little did I know in the 90s, my mom pioneered voice recognition software by looking at this monochrome screen and going, Heidi. And now I learned you have to be very particular when prompting people for information.
Interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
It's and so this is the neat thing too. We think of the origins of access to systems. And like my first computer as a kid, I think I can't remember how old I was exactly, but I was like probably like 10 or something. And I got a Sinclair ZX81. My dad had bought this little Sinclair system. It had like a press keyboard. It wasn't even like a tap keyboard. It actually had like this weird, like, strange layer on top. And it had basic built in, and it had like the keys had the commands on it. So you'd do like function G would be go to, and it would pre-type the stuff for you. So it was the most bizarre thing to learn. I'd never programmed. I'd never done anything. And then you've got to like, so I sat there, and I've got a picture of me as a kid sitting in my underwear, staring up at the screen, because I don't have a desk because I'm a 10-year-old. But, and it had a 16K RAM expander. My dad was like, I want to make sure you got all the room for your programs. 16 kilobytes, folks. Let's just hang on for a second and think about, like, couldn't even fit that in the cap of my San Pellegrino right now. Like there's nothing out there that's as small as 16 kilobytes.
That is crazy.
But it was 4K on board, and then that gave you 20K altogether. And I mean, it was more than I needed, but that was the level. And I don't even remember I can't even imagine what he would have paid for it, right? Like that TRS-80 too, like how much do you think it was, Tim?
That would have had to been in brand new at that year's dollars. I don't even know what year that came out, but I would imagine that would have been easily, at least a $5,000 system.
Yep.
Yeah.
The cassette tape drive with it as well. And there was a dot matrix printer as well with it. So I mean, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 easily.
And that was the thing, is if we look at the prices, I think my ZX81 was probably, I think it was the first one that came in that was like $200. You could get it it had limited functionality, but that was $200 in, that money, right? This is 35-year-old money. So at the same year, a brand new Honda Civic was $7,000 for like all in, so $200 is a pretty big chunk relative to the other assets you had in your life.
I mean, that's what did the new Apple, the Pros, right? With that they just announced with the monitor and all that. That's almost like the comparison that you could make now, because those, for the price of the monitor and the computer and all that, is almost the price of a small car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Oh yeah.
And this is, and look at the system that we got was a barely functional system that delivered that did basic, right? You can run it as an emulator on your phone now, and we do it because we like to like go old school. You know, it's hilarious to think of how much has evolved in that time. So, and then first gig, right? Like, so then you first, like, your technology related gig. I think it was different because when sort of my generation of folks came through, you could do it because there was no schooling for it. Like that, the reason why I was homeschooled on IT was because my dad did it as a job. He was a system admin. And I wrote on my like grade 8 thing, they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm like, I'm going to be a systems administrator. I had no idea what it was, but you know, it seemed like a good idea. I want to be what my dad does. My dad's cool. I want to be like my dad. And we sat up at night doing like database development with DBase 2 and all these crazy things. And then when I was 15, I saw a job for the local police station, and it said you needed to do data entry on the system was based on, you know, Novell with DB2 or database 2, you know, as the front end. It was like, all right, so DBase 2, I already had it. I grew up in a tiny little town. So there was precisely 2 people in the town that knew what DBase 2 was. It was me and my dad. So when I went for this gig, it was they're hilarious. They're like, we've got all these 35-year-old guys applying for this data entry job, but this 15-year-old kid actually has the technology on his resume. Let's give it a try. And started doing programming and started doing stuff because I kind of saw what was fun. And then hung out with the Xerox guy who was the people that maintained the system. And they were running Novell, and that was a Novell file server. So I started learning how to do stuff like that. And I was like, you know, 15-year-old kid to have access to those systems. It's different, right? Like that was a game changer as far as career. I'm here today doing what I do because I kind of got early access to that stuff. Angela, you had, were you in the AV club? Like what was your first touch of a computer?
Yeah. So funny enough, I'll go back to and Eric will know this. We have the public cable 10, the public cable channel. I was a cameraman for cable 10 when I was in high school. So we one of the media teachers did a show on cable 10, sort of like where I think the Computer Chronicles shows like that sort of started off on those kind of public channels. So I started there being a cameraman, and then getting more involved in a lot of the production of the show. And then when I went to college, I was in a co-op program, and that got me exposed to a lot more. That got me into different companies. And one of the spots that I was, it's funny how I think most of my jobs were all in the financial area, but yeah, I got to work with one of the local banks here doing a lot of systems analysis type activities, which was really such a great learning experience for me. So, you know, and I encourage, I always encourage interns and folks like that to really pursue those types of programs in schools, students to pursue those types of programs in school, because that really helps give you a leg up, getting a feel for, is this something you want to do or not.
The other one that I remembered, it was like the early gigs was being able to read ahead of where you needed to be. Like it was different then because there was, like, technology was a little bit more stabilized. It wasn't vastly expanding like it is with cloud and serverless and containers and all this crazy stuff. But we still have a strong base today, so people don't need to do all that stuff. But like, to suddenly get asked to come to an interview, you knew what you were going to get asked because they would hand it to you. And I remembered going down, and it was my big financial services company. And so I got told literally before I go for the interview, like, oh, by the way, they run Token Ring. And I was like, awesome. What the hell is that?
Yeah.
So I had my CCNA study guide, or my Novell study guide, rather, my CNA study guide. It was written by Todd Lamley, who was he was the guy, wrote for Cybex, did Cisco, Novell, did all the guides. And I read the Token Ring chapter on the way down in the subway to the interview, so that when I got there, then this was my way to Dodge. They said, so what's your experience with Token Ring? Now, my inner voice said, I don't know. I'm not 80, so I don't have any. But my outer voice said, oh, that's a great question. I'm pretty familiar with it. Are you all Token Ring, or you have any Ethernet? I've done a lot more stuff recently around Ethernet and Apple Talk and such. And so it got them, oh, well, we do have some areas. I was like, thank goodness. As long as there's no follow-up questions, I'm in okay shape.
Eric, that's in today's day and age, the Dodge is now called the Pivot. So you just pivoted. So.
That's right, yeah. And I still remember the line in that Lamley wrote in this book. He described the way that Token Ring worked. It uses beaconing. It uses a ring, and it uses beaconing to let you know when there was a problem, and it would send this upstream beacon. And the whole thing was, it said if there was a problem with a Token Ring card, that the only way, they said, how do you fix it? It said, you burn it as a reminder to the others of what happens when the Token Ring beacons. Like, there's no way to fix it. They said, throw the card out because it's dead to the world. So there was comedy in technology writing back in the day as well, which I always appreciated.
I think we're very lucky to have those experiences, Eric. When I started as well, my environment was a Token Ring environment. And a couple of years after, we slowly transitioned to Ethernet. At the same time, we were a frame relay, if you remember frame relay for the wide area network. So yeah, it's and T1s and things like that. And now it's all it's so different. I'm glad that I got to kind of progress through that technology transition.
Now, Tim, I really want to, because you have VAR experience and you had history going into that one, I've personally found one of the best things when you're talking to a customer is that you can go through these experience stories, right? And it gives them an incredible comfort, like, oh man, I remember that. And then you go through these kind of trench stories. Yeah. And then when you have to talk to them about new things, there's a real kind of warmth and comfort in this sort of shared history that does help you. Did you find that was something that happened for you as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's being on the vendor side now, it's nice to have all those stories. And, where if I'm dealing with working through backing up Office 365, because that's a new thing now, right? Your email is no longer on premises. Well, it's nice to have all those years and years of IS and tag or ESC util and defragmenting databases and, Exchange dying and you spending the entire night just trying to get it back online.
Yep.
I think the experience is really, it's good to have all that behind you, and it definitely helps to build an authority.
Yeah.
So this is a question that I like to ask people, and I kind of think, do you think that your kids, what will they have as their kind of history to bring into their first job? What's the experience been like? Because they didn't live through generational changes necessarily in technology. It seems to all be moving fast. I'm just curious in your thoughts on what's their technology world going to look like.
I mean, that one's really tough for me because my oldest is 6. So, I mean, they've got little tablets now that are purpose built, right? And they have Learning Academy on them and whatnot. But I know my daughter one day said to me, well, Grandpa's having his roof redone. Why don't you just text the people doing it? She just completely knows that I should be able to text them, or that I should be able to find out how to contact them and send them this information that they need to have. And so, I mean, 10 years from now, when she's 16, I can't even imagine. I mean, look how much we've changed in the last 10 years. So 10 years from now, when she's able to really fully dive into technology to an extent that a normal adult would, I'm honestly at a loss.
It's hard to say. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
if
mean,
I think of how many, you know, they'll go back. A programmer in 10 years will be like, oh, remember back in the day when there was only 200 JavaScript frameworks? Man, how did we survive? You know?
right? You see all the jokes about, like good programmers and Stack Overflow, and, insert your joke here about Stack Overflow. But, right, when we started, or, I know when I started and there was an issue with Active Directory, let's say, Google really wasn't a thing yet.
Right.
And so you couldn't just use your Google foo and look it up. And now it's a lot more of the skills that we're looking for is how to find the answers, not necessarily already knowing the answers. So I'm unsure.
Yeah,
No,
no,
go ahead, Sam.
that's good. It's, I think when I look for people that are coming into my team or that I'm recommending, the first thing I tell them is like, be prepared to tell somebody how you get through the problem when you don't know the answer. That's as important of a skill as having lived through it necessarily, but how do you get to there? Angela, you were going to say something there.
I was just going to touch on what Tim mentioned there. I believe it so much. A lot of people now, or a lot of folks, you can fall into the trap where you're spending time looking for the answer rather than understanding how that understanding the answer, so to speak. I know back in Novell 411 days when we were operating in that environment, it was very important to each of us to understand why something happened, not just sort of how to fix it very quickly. Oh, get the answer. Oh, just do these 3 steps and you should be set, or reboot the server, whatever. It was more about understanding how did we get to this point. And I can see how some folks can get lost in sort of that.
Yeah, and this is I use this, and it's sort of a stolen, not sort of, it's definitely stolen from Ray Dalio's Principles book, and talks about we should the right thing to do is to seek the right answer, not to seek being right. And I think that's the worst thing that we bump into is that because we have so much access to information, we also have this sort of want to own it and have the right answer. And I think we all grew up at one point in our lives, we thought we had the answer. And we were probably 15 when we thought we had the answer. We did not have the answer. I'm well over 15 now, still don't have the answer. And I'm more willing to admit I don't have it, and I'm continuously searching. I think I get farther from it every day, but I get better at searching. That's all.
I think we've all seen that diagram, right? It's like the evolution of IT, and it's like, I don't know anything about IT. And it's like, I know some things. It's like, I know everything about IT. And then the next step is, I don't know anything about IT.
Exactly.
And I feel like it's just that constant cycle of that. And it's okay to not know.
And so the other thing that I love is going back at, you have to apply context to the reason we did certain things. And this is a problem that we have in technology or in anything in society, right? Is like, remember to apply context to it. We'll look back and we'll say like, oh yeah, I didn't have texting. So on a Friday night when I wanted to go with my friends, if I didn't know where they were going to be at 6 o'clock, I was home. Like that was it, you're dead. Or you would drive with a friend who you did find who had a car, and you would drive to a place where your friends may or may not be driving nearby at the same time. Like it was just happenstance if you bump into them. And we joke about those things because we knew the context of the conversation. Somebody that doesn't know the context would be like, well, that's crazy. Like, why would you ever do that? And it's always think about applying context to the time frame.
So you made me just think about, I just saw this on Twitter last week with Stranger Things being out. There was a scene where they were in a dark room developing film. And there were some responses where some younger people didn't understand what that room was even for.
Right.
And that they just knew that it had something to do with the pictures, but like, are they enhancing the pictures or something? And, why are they dipping the pictures in water and all this? And it's funny to think like, well, that just seems so obvious to me because that was a thing back then. But to not even have that understanding of, well, pictures are all digital now. Film is for, enthusiasts, whatever but you send that off to a shop and they develop it. And so the concept of
you didn't
why
have
they're
two
doing
jugs
that.
of developer and fixer and like you the whole scene, right?
So, I mean, what's it going to be like another 20 years from now? Are people going to be like, oh, well, why are you looking at your pictures on a monitor?
Right.
How else would I?
Yeah, exactly. That's weird. So they're not projected right into your minds. Wow. How retro.
People didn't have retinal implants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid get off my lawn syndrome, right? Like do you see people that are entering into that phase in their mid 30s and 40s now because they've survived some of these things?
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of times too, if you have the personality to be in technology, a lot of times that unfortunately comes with that kind of one-upping mentality as well. And so somebody will say something, and then you'll be like, oh yeah, but we totally had to do this. And for some reason, me having to suffer more makes me better than you. And
Yeah.
But yeah, I think so. It's hard to break away from that. And I think that just makes it then harder to teach those that are coming up to be okay with not having lived through that.
Yeah, I think that'll be something as I'm doing a ton of stuff really around like bringing people into the industry. And it was funny, there was a tweet chat that happened recently, and it was about like, how do people get in when they're not in? And like, we all also need to kind of go back and think about like not intern programs, but like apprenticeship style programs where you're getting paid, you get a mentor as part of it. And I was talking about, there's things like this Lambda school, which basically you attend the school. It's a boot camp style program for development. You go for free and you only pay back once you get a job. So the whole idea is they want you to succeed. There's some challenges, of course, because they're teaching development. So maybe people get involved, you get into the deep end of the pool pretty quick, maybe don't succeed. So there is a weird thing of like, well, how do you find those things? And I remembered my first like startup experience was working with two other guys doing teaching, because we had a couple of PCs that we were running like servers, running Novell on them. And we were teaching people how to do sysadmin work and using NT351 and Windows 95 and doing all this stuff. And we would teach them for free. And there was the deal, like, you come and you hang out with us for 12 hours a week. Whatever your current job is, you find the 12 hours. You come and hang out with us. We'll give you free education. We'll do training. We'll teach you how to get certification tests, and we'll get you a gig. And the deal was that when you get the gig, say it was like $35 an hour for a contract, which was like crazy money at the time, you give us $3 an hour. So whatever your 6-month contract is, 3 out of the $35 or whatever we'd work out would go back to the school to basically keep the school afloat. And I was like, man, we should almost go back to the well and kind of try this idea again, because it feels like that's kind of what we need to get people to get a new entry in, to give them that lived experience without having to, because they don't have those chances. It's very competitive now. Angelo, I know you, again, God, we could talk about working with the mainframe folks who told us that distributed computing is just a fad.
Yeah. Well, my favorite is when we first introduced virtualization, and the mainframe folks would look at me and just brush me off and say, that's not new. We've been doing that on the mainframe forever. I mean, and then it's just that, and it's like, no. I know it may not be new. I'm just letting you know that it's now on x86 platform. We can now do it with the X. Yeah, but we've done that on the mainframe forever, But so that always gets me to chuckle.
Now, here's the other challenge I think we have is the hubris that new things will get rid of old things. And I say that literally, I say it as hubris. It is truly staring at the gods, thinking that you can take over the world. The 200 JavaScript frameworks don't get rid of the other 200, right? That we don't get rid of the mainframe by having distributed, serverless functions running in AWS are not going to kill off the Windows server industry. But some people, when they get so kind of like deeply involved in one technology, and they put on the blinders and they're like, this is going to replace everything. Like, oh no, kid, this is just going to be a ride along car beside the 10 other things that you won't be able to get rid of.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why you still see like Windows XP in at some places. I don't, I almost hesitate to mention Windows 3.1, but you never know.
I found ESX3 in the wild.
Nice.
Not too long ago, but like this year. And I don't remember the reason. It was something about the I don't know if it was the OS they were running or what, but for some reason they had to stick with that. And that was just for one application. So one server, but a licensed ESX3 out there. And it's the same reason we still find AIX and all this stuff out there, because whatever software they had went out of business, and it's what they have, and they can't go away from it without spending a lot more money than what they need to.
And remember, this was the reason why we had a lot of those situations. Dongles, right? There's a physical dongle for some piece of software, and after ESX into ESX4 and up, they stopped exposing the physical serial port. And I had that situation where I had to have like some goofball system just so that I could license the virtual machine, and I had to pin it to the host because it couldn't leave there. But I needed to virtualize it because it ran on an old piece of software and an old operating system. And the hardware it was sitting on was going to go belly up pretty soon. So I'm like, oh, it's P to V it. So physical to virtual conversion, but I needed that serial port, right?
And then don't forget the struggle back then too of when your license server was what was that, an LM license server on vCenter, because you couldn't put vCenter in the cluster as a virtual machine, because if it was off, couldn't contact a license server to boot, and it was the chicken and the egg scenario. Things we don't have to worry about today.
No, that's it. The other day I'm like, oh darn, I need to spin up a VMware lab. It used to be like spin up VirtualBox, even that I'm like, that's crazy. But like we used to have to set up physical little tiny desktops, make sure you had the right drivers to be able to set it up. Now I'm like, I'm going to go to packet.net and spin up a 3-node cluster with Terraform. It takes 9.5 minutes to do. It hands me back my dynamic IP and credentials. I log in and that's it. Here's my test lab. And when I'm done, I rip it down. It cost me, $14 to run it for a day and a half, and life is good. Angelo, so the early days of community in technology as well, I think are ones. My first Linux user group, long time ago. What's your first peer community that you bumped into in technology?
First one was the Novell community.
Yeah.
And it was, at that time for me, it was all about getting the Novell certifications, getting sort of immersed in that I like to say culture, because I felt like it was a different way of doing things. The folks, I felt that we're different, so I really enjoyed that community a lot. I then transitioned to sort of the Windows environment, moved away from which I think everyone sort of moved slowly away from Novell to Active Directory and Windows. So then that was sort of where I started getting more involved, and then virtualization started becoming a thing, and that's where I moved into sort of that community as well. So that's sort of my transition to where I am today.
Tim, well, of course, it's funny. Angela and I grew up close to each other, didn't know each other until recent years, but you grew up in a different country, different part of the country. What was the tech community like around you when you were younger?
So it's when I was in high school and just learning, right? I mean, you had the traveling computer shows or hardware sales, like swap meets, if you will. But other than that, like I didn't really find a community until like 8 years ago, maybe, when I started working with one VAR, and the coworker there was like, oh, well, you should totally create a blog and put what you just told me for solving that issue on a blog. And I'm like, wow, okay, but who's going to read that? And he said, well, you just sign up and, by the way, sign up for Twitter too. And I'm like, what is Twitter? What is this? And honestly, that's when I found out that there's other people out there, and there's this thing called vExpert and and that Twitter just seemed to be the home of all these VMware based people. And that was it. Because prior to that, it was just the people I worked with. And we did have in Northwest Ohio, there was a regional IT group, but it was not so well run at the time. So one meeting a year kind of thing. I hadn't heard of vMugs or anything. I don't even know if that was a thing 8 years ago or not. And
it would have been in the early days, but yeah, like the membership was in the hundreds instead of the many thousands it is now. So yeah, I mean, it's funny to think of that.
Yeah.
And
so my community was all just virtual to start with.
Yeah.
Until then I found out about vMugs, and I had to drive, I think, like 3 hours to get to the closest vMug.
That's
Eric.
That always amazed me. And Angela, you and I, because we grew up in the same area in Toronto, we went to the same vMug, and then we would, like, that was it. You never, there was no other option, because in Toronto, the closest city that had another vMug was nowhere nearby. Versus I see people in your area, Tim, and like people that come to the Indianapolis vMug. Why it's so huge? Because people will drive all bloody day and come to this thing. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think last year didn't like John Hiltonbrand end up driving like 12 hours or something to get to the Indy vMug?
There's a commitment to doing that stuff. Like, most people I know wouldn't take a hard pinch if it meant that it would take time out of their day, and they could be money at the other side of that, and they still would not put the effort in. But yet, to get access to people and learning, we've recognized that it's worth it to do something like that, right?
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think it's, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's more about the people and the learning versus the technology, so to speak, because we study the technology during the day, during our off hours. We're comfortable with that, but it's just the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to get to see Tim next week at this local meetup, which is great. And that, I think, is what inspires people to go through that effort of 12-hour rides. And I just quickly wanted to mention, I remember here in the Toronto area here, we used to have these computer shows held at the convention centers here, and there would be lineups of people to attend, and it was mostly for sort of desktop enthusiasts. So there'd be a lot of desktop booths, a lot of shareware booths, a lot of CDs. Yeah. So you could buy, the shareware for like $1.99 or whatever, But yeah, a lot of that back in the day. And I remember lining up to attend those events. They were great places to meet people and just chat with people that are interested in the desktop PCs at the time, etc. So
yeah, I'm very nostalgic for that. I almost want to, like, I like going down to Micro Center and being able to see everything and, browse all these parts. But it was something different when it was one of those like traveling shows, and it was just, tabletops full of hardware, and you would go and you'd pick out this from there and this from there, and maybe a case from there, a motherboard there, and talk to them about how you needed to change the jumpers to get, your speed that you need.
Yes.
And, because
your IRQ is when you put that card in, because if you can't get IRQ conflicts, can't have two modems in the same. Oh, the sound card is killing my modem. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think on my first upgraded PC, I think it was a sound card that had a SCSI controller on it as well, because that was for the new CD-ROM. I had this 2X CD-ROM, which was just phenomenal.
Right. We used to actually care about what the X was. Before 10X, kids, there was 2X, and that's CD-ROM speeds. And the fact that you could actually oversample and actually have skip protection on CD-ROMs.
And the day you got your first burner and you spent 3.5 hours to burn a CD so you could put it in your big sleeve in your car. Yeah. And now people are just streaming Pandora in their car.
Yeah, well, that's it. And that's the thing of, like, remember, having the case of like cassettes. You'd have the 12 pack, those manufacturers are gone now. They're making Apple parts.
Yeah.
But like that was it. You had to like plan your route. I need 12. I got 10 CDs. I mean, you got a changer in the CD player. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And the same technology kind of came. We looked at, SANs when we moved into shared storage. And now I got a SAN downstairs. I got a Synology. There's more storage than I used to have in an enterprise data center. And I just bought it off of Amazon, for like $85 a disk for 6 terabytes per disk.
But you're still using RAID, which is now how old of a technology and hasn't.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we've got other things out there that are competing with it, but I mean, how much longer till that goes away? I think it's going to be a long time.
And that's why I laugh when people say like, oh, but aren't you using erasure coding? I'm like, a RAID by any other name, my friends. It is exactly the same. Like, it's just the Reed-Solomon codes that ultimately drive the technology. They haven't changed. It's based on the same, patents from decades ago.
Yeah.
Still prevalent, right? And even though it's in the cloud, guess what, kids? They run on similar hardware and stuff like that. So,
but serverless.
Yeah. So the other one that I remember this one, and this is a platform that people usually know well, love it or hate it, Lotus Notes. So this was the days of choosing, this was enterprise collaboration. And I would say it's almost like the first experience with DevOps, in that you had the same platform drove your enterprise mail infrastructure. You had database, people that were like Lotus Notes admins and architects, and then you had developers who were building the applications that connected. If I think about it, it was ahead of its time. It has not yet been replaced with a technology that's as collaborative, but yet it died, and we have all these horrible experiences and these great experiences with it. But were you ever a Lotus Notes aficionado, Tim? You didn't go through that fun?
I did not. It was at one place that I worked with, but I didn't have to touch it. So
Exchange came along, and that was I remember when Exchange came, and it was the new enterprise mail. It was MS Mail back then. But it was like, wait a minute, but it doesn't have integrated like databases. You can't program against it. Like, oh, well, you just use this .NET thing. Like, I don't know if I believe that that's going to take off or not.
Lotus Notes was Betamax and Exchange was VHS.
Right.
And a lot of things were better on Betamax, right? But I think VHS just got the exposure.
That it was.
And I just quickly on that Lotus Notes topic, I know a lot of people stayed on Lotus Notes because they would use the old reasoning. It's more secure, less vulnerabilities, less issues than its competitor, and that's sort of. And then moving that to today, people would say, well, I don't want to move my email to the cloud. It's less secure or something. So you find some parallels between movements, if you will. But yeah, that was one of the big things, being more secure.
And here's another one from the throwback to the past. Weekly server reboots. We would have scheduled weekly reboots because they were running NT and it would have memory leaks and performance would degrade. So whether we needed to or not, we would reboot these bloody boxes and then have all this crazy monitoring to make sure they came back up.
Unless you ran Novell, then those guys would rub it in your face that their servers were up for the last 5.5 years.
If Twitter was around then, it would be littered with uptime screens of people like showing these heroic like 5-year uptimes.
Yeah. We had a Novell server was up, I think 300 and something days. So that was something to be proud of.
And I think
until we pulled the 2 hard drives out.
So Novell server uptime has the kind of historic, implications of like Richard Gere's hamster story. We all knew of some story about some, did you hear? Well, there was this Novell server that was at some bank and they built a wall around it, and they didn't realize it was around the server room.
Yeah.
And then they had a problem. They lost access to it, and it turns out that it had been up for 4 years, and they didn't know because they built a building around it. Like, it never actually happened, but you just trusted that it did because you didn't have the internet to dispel those rumors. So, nor did Richard Gere, God bless him.
As ridiculous as that is, it's believable.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what made it. It had this beautiful urban legend kind of capability because there was no way to debunk it, because we all were like, yeah, I could see it happening. Like it was like you trusted it. Meanwhile, now, like, the entire thing you build towards is, I want this server to be able to go down 9 times a day and my application won't care. We've really changed the focus. Everything back then was, I want to do everything. I want 17 sources of power. I want 5 types of gasoline and diesel and air, whatever that's going to drive generators. I want this to never shut down.
And that was when we would throw everything on, 1 or 2 servers. Like, if you had a server that still had compute power and space, throw another application on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've come a long way, and at the same time, we are repeating history with new technologies. I think if you had 30 seconds of advice to offer, current newcomer to technology about what they'll look back on in 25 years, what are they going to laugh at now, that in the way that we laugh about server uptimes from Novell?
Boy, I think they're probably going to laugh at the way that we do virtualization today on premises. And, just the fact that, oh, well, you guys thought it was something cool to like vMotion or storage vMotion. I know we always remember our first vMotion, but I mean, how much different is it going to be where 20 years from now, just being able to vMotion a workload from one machine to another? I mean, I think the nostalgic is going to be this OS-based virtualization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Angelo, what's your advice for future you if current you went into a time machine and came out today, right?
Boy, yeah, no, we'll certainly always be learning. That's one thing. But the way we talk today about machine learning and AI, I think it's still early days, if you will. That's going to be embedded in everything we do going forward, that people won't even, I don't believe people will even mention it anymore. Like, oh, that's AI or that's machine learning. It's just part of whatever you're working on, and it's just accepted already.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's, we have this thing, we call it, I call it the term AI washing, right? Like, everything is powered by AI now, but it will just be, it's known. Everything will be automatic. It's intrinsic that it's in part of what we do. I definitely, yeah. For people today, that's, even if you're not going to get into developing it, study it and be aware of like the implications of it. There's tons of neat stuff, kind of like with data, right? So big data is a thing. Well, it's always been a thing. It's just that it was different platforms that held it. Now it's the way we mine the data that becomes important, and the tools we use. So what we're still going to have in 20 years is giant mainframes with tons of front end systems to process the data. And we'll have a lot of people that don't care about that stuff. Like you said, Tim, it won't matter that it can move left and right across servers. What'll matter is that, what do you do with that thing?
Yeah. I think the big thing, right, is understanding the why instead of the how. We've been so focused on the how the last 20 years. I think understanding the reasoning of why something is going to be what will help the next generation of IT really excel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric, maybe the cloud is the new mainframe. Right. Right.
Well, I tell you that's why I always go back every once in a while and I remind people. I said, we've got this amazing idea of virtualization. It's a common, unified, single platform that's sliced up for processing and then shared, and then we use these virtual screens and virtual desktop interfaces in order to access these. I'm like, you mean they're kind of like 3270 terminals going back to a mainframe with a giant data engine? Well,
yes, but no.
Yeah. Yeah. So whatever the next ILPAR will be, whatever the next Vax VMS will be, whatever the next virtualization will be, remember why. Enjoy the learning experience, like Angelo says. Definitely, folks that want to get involved, look to the peer group. We've got such incredible access to now ML and AI and security and all this stuff. There's communities wrapped around it. So I encourage folks to make sure you reach out. There's podcasts now, which is experiencing a sort of Gutenberg type of revolution of access to information, where you can have it that's not in the written word, it's not structured. And we're going to see then that converted to text, where people are going to be reading podcasts, because they just can't consume it by ear at the time, or they want to get quotes from it. Tim Ferriss is a great one. He actually transcribes all of his podcasts and hosts them there, because some people just like to read them. I mean, that's what the 4 Hour Workweek was. It was a bloody printed version of a podcast. So it's out there to be had. Tim, so again, before we roll, where do we find you online, and where can we find you in person? I'm sure show season is upon us. So if you're listening relatively close to the launch date of this, where do we find you in the next couple of months?
Yeah, so again, online, tsmith.co or at tsmith_co on Twitter. I will be at VMworld this year, so that's going to be nice. And hopefully I'll make it out to a couple VMUG UserCons too. I've got a session talking about always be learning, essentially, this year on the VMUG circuit. So hopefully I'll be able to attend a couple more UserCons this year.
Nice. And thank you again for all you do to support the growth in technology and helping people to really get to know why this stuff's important, and that we've got a peer group that they can lean on. Angelo, the father of my community, the man who I was not alone in wanting to nerd out on this stuff. Where do we find you online?
Yeah. So on Twitter, at Angelo Luciani, virtuwise.com is the blog. I will be at VMworld as well, so looking forward to meeting everyone. And check out the Nutanix online community at next.nutanix.com. Nice.
And of course, just as an inside joke, use Tor, use Signal. So stay away from the Google machine. But we'll come to VMworld and find us and ask Angela about the Google machine. So we'll have fun stories to share about that. That'll be one in 20 years. We'll be laughing about some of those things that we're living through right now. Awesome. Well, folks, thank you very much. Don't forget, you can find me. I'm at DiscoPosse on Twitter. Go to DiscoPossePodcast.com. You can get all the show notes and find the links to other great conversation. Thanks to Angelo and Tim for joining me today. Hopefully this has been fun, worth a listen. If you do want to hear more, if you want to join the show, just drop me. My DMs are open, or just email me to eric@discoposse.com and share your show ideas. And we look forward to seeing you all soon.